that was sort of the point where it kind of dawned on me that I had no idea what to expect. And the next time I was going to see them or be finished with that race was once we'd crossed a continent, which was quite difficult to think about.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Now, if I was to look at ways of describing my guest today, there are many terms I could use. Accomplished film director, lover of the outdoors, endurance athlete. Recently, another term that's been added to this list, that of an ultracyclist. In 2022, my guests successfully competed in their first ultracycling event, a bike race roughly the size of Wales, before taking on one of the most prestigious and challenging ultras out there, the Transcontinental. Over 4,000 kilometres of cycling to traverse the continent of Europe from Belgium to Bulgaria. So without further ado, my name is Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to announce my guest for today's episode of the Seek Travel Ride podcast, Lizzie Jenkins. Lizzie, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. That was very, very nice.
Oh, I'm so chuffed to be speaking with you today, Lizzie. I think we're going to have some interesting stories to hear from you.
Yeah.
So my first question, Lizzie, and I ask this of all of my guests, is can you please describe the first bicycle that you ever rode?
Oh, first one that I remember or first one that I know I rode?
Oh, well, maybe you could do both.
Yeah, because my mum's got a picture of me on this little tricycle, and so that's definitely the first one, but I have no recollection of that whatsoever. The first one I remember riding, I think I must have been about 8, and it was a purple like sort of kids bike with flowers on it, and yeah, I was cycling around. Me and my sister, my parents went to the park, and my sister rode into a bin.
Oh, better her
After
than
that,
you.
she never got again. Yeah, exactly. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right because I didn't cycle into the bin.
Is she younger or older than you?
She's younger, yeah.
Hopefully she picked herself up and, didn't just, scowl at her bike.
No, well, she's never really got back on a bike.
Oh, it was a life-changing moment for her at such an early age.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, gosh. So, Lizzie, I know we're going to speak a lot about cycling today, but what I also want to offer up is just the opportunity for you to introduce yourself to our listeners. Like I said, I put a lot of description to how I would describe you, but how would you describe yourself?
So I live in London, but I'm from Hereford, near Wales, and I do love cycling. I can't deny that. And I probably started getting into it because of my dad, and my grandpa's a cyclist. He's sort of very, probably obsessed is the right word. He's always done it. He takes my grandma around much to her disdain, and then got my dad into it. And then my grandpa actually bought me my first road bike. Yeah, so that's the cycling side of how that started. And then I work in TV, which is, it's pretty fun. It's quite a good way to see the world as well.
Yeah, you've definitely taken a lot of trips overseas with your filmmaking, haven't you?
Yeah. It's only sort of been in the last few years, I think, as I started getting better jobs. But it's a good window into sort of places and people's lives that you just wouldn't really get to be in otherwise, I think, which is what I like about it.
And some amazing locations too.
Yeah, probably quite random locations, like in the outback in Australia in a gold mine. That's probably like 100 miles from the nearest shop.
There's some interesting characters there too, no doubt.
Oh yeah, very, very interesting characters. Yeah, the sort of people that you probably won't want to spend too much time with sometimes, but they're great to have a beer with for a night.
And actually, in those sort of areas as well, you really realise the significance of like the outback or the local community pub, as we call it as well. It's almost like the community centre, isn't it?
Yeah, I can see that actually.
Yeah. But the outback is one place that your films have taken you to, but you've also gone to some other amazing places. The Amazon comes to mind for me.
Yeah. I spent quite a lot of time there actually because when I finished my training after uni, I did a year's training in documentary, and then I wanted to sort of put it to the test. And I'd met this community in the Peruvian Amazon a couple of years before, so I was always sort of obsessed with the rainforest, and then did a trip out there and could never really forget about it. So then I got into touch with them. So after I did that year, I went back there and just started filming them. And then it was funny because I think I must have been there for 6 weeks, and I was just sort of following what they were doing and with their rehabilitation with spider monkeys, and thought, oh yeah, I'll make a film about this. I'll be done in a couple of months. But 6 years later, I'm still not finished. And I've been back every year since.
Wow. I mean, you were saying earlier that, your grandfather is sort of obsessed with cycling, and I often call the other word for obsession is dedication or passion. Would you say that the Amazon became a passion for you in that same way?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I really liked how different it was, I think, and how it just feels really exotic, and like the trees and like everything's just quite overwhelming or in a different way that yeah. And I sort of liked the uncomfortableness of it, like the humidity, and it's always a bit too hot. There's too many insects, you're getting bitten, and like that side of it I liked because I feel like it makes you appreciate how wild it is.
Yeah,
In a way.
to me personally, when I think of the Amazon, I think of it's almost like a final frontier.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
It sounds cliche now I say it out loud, but yeah, I feel there's so much that we still don't know about that part of the world.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, so much. And yeah, I just quite like extreme environments, and that's just one for sure.
Yeah. And you were speaking about the weather there. My picture of the Amazon is like humid, wet jungle. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, they have seasons, so it depends what time of year you're there. But like one time when I was there, it was through the rainy season, which is over our winter, sort of like November onwards, and all of their trails flood. So like when you're going out looking for the monkeys or doing what work you need to do in the forest, you have to wade through these swamps. And because the water level rises, all the tarantulas get booted out of their nests on the ground. So as you're walking through this water, on like the bottom of the trees just above the surface of the water, for like a lot of trees around you, are just tarantulas. And sometimes as you walk past, they sort of shoot into the water and they can swim. I didn't know that they could swim. But
Oh my goodness. Sorry. For the benefit of our listeners who cannot see my face, and I say this as an Australian, no less, I don't think mortified. I'm stunned at what I've just heard. Tarantulas swimming. I'm sorry. I'm just this visual picture of wading through this jungle, this swamp, and just all these tarantulas above the waterline, all of a sudden diving into the water that I'm wading through. Lizzie, I really want to ask you, as someone who's British, because as an Australian, like I said, we're proud of our dangerous animals to some degree, and I'm not scared of spiders. I'm aware of them, but I sort of feel I can jump 2 meters and I'm safe. But I know quite a lot of Brits who haven't grown up with that same sort of danger of arachnids. How did you feel when you first came across this?
Well, I never liked spiders, to be fair, and then I didn't really like the hairy house spiders. And then when I went there, you sort of have to learn to get used to them quite quickly, because it's not uncommon to find them in your room or in your bed, or it's just sort of accepted as part of life. And like there was a little tarantula's nest in the kitchen, so you sort of get used to it.
Did you ever give them names?
I mean, I haven't personally, but I'm sure people have.
The only thing I can equate that to is, again, living in Australia, we used to have what we call huntsman spiders, which aren't furry like tarantulas, but they are quite big. And they have this great habit of just being, in a corner of a house. You walk into a room and they'll catch you off guard. It always makes me jump. But I always used to give them a name. I used to call them Fernando.
I like that. That takes the edge off as well.
Oh, definitely. And you were saying like the Amazon really got in under your skin then, like it became part of you. It's where your heart always goes to.
Yeah, I really loved being there and the people were lovely and I just really liked everything about how when you're there or each time I went, you're sort of thrown into this quite tight-knit community of people that you would just never usually like be friends with in maybe like here because everyone's from different countries, from different ages, and you're sort of stripped of all the things that you usually identify as you in like this world. It's like, for example, clothes. Style goes out the window. You just sort of wear what's comfortable, just like everyone's kind of in the same like jungle, sort of ripped, sort of disgusting clothes. And the showers, it's just cold, so you don't really shower that much, and there's no phones or no internet, no signal. So then we played a lot of cards. I just like the community of it and just, yeah, back to basics and like the simplicity of it.
I sort of also think with that environment, and again, talking through the discomfort side of things, I wonder if there's part of you that's channeled that in terms of what you've gone on to do with your bike rides. And I know later in the podcast we'll talk about what you've achieved and pushing the limits and the boundaries in terms of your ultra rides, but you love cycling. Bikes are a part of your life. Long distance cycling and long distance events, that's something that you've been doing for quite some time, isn't it?
More, I guess, in the last year, I think. Because my dad was always really into cycling, and it sort of took me a while to also, like, he tried to get me to go out with him quite a lot when I was younger. And I was always like, oh, yeah, maybe. And then I never really did. And then I can't remember when it was, but I was really unfit at uni. I put on quite a lot of weight because all I did was drink basically for 4 years. And I barely going to the gym was like a huge event. And I was really proud of myself if I went and did like 20 minutes in the gym in like a month or something. And then after that, I remember trying to do park run and I could barely do 5 kilometers. And I remember looking around and all these like old women were just absolutely ruining me. And I thought, I need to sort this out. I'm like 21 or whatever it was. So then I signed up for a marathon.
Naturally.
And yeah. And I thought if I sign up for that, then I have to. That will force me into it. Then I have to do it. So then, because I'd done that, and then my dad was like, "Oh, I'm going to sign us up for a cycling event." I was like, "Okay," but it was the Mallorca 312, and because I'd done that marathon, like it must have been 3 or 4 months before, even though I'd not really done any cycling, I thought, oh yeah, I'll be fine. Like if I survive that, I can do. But I had no idea what he'd signed us up for, and it was hell. He literally had to push me up the hills, and by the time we finished, the whole finish line was closed. They were trying to get us off the course for a while. There was just sort of like empty beer cans, strewn across the finish as if it had finished like the day before. So yeah, after I'd done that, I was like, oh, okay, like my first cycling event was that. So now I can, like, longer stuff didn't then seem too bad.
I can only imagine, and for the benefit of our listeners, the Mallorca 312, that's a full lap of the island of Mallorca, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of down one side. It's very hilly.
Quite a lot of kilometres as well. It's the idea of that being like one of the first events. I'm not going to do the 50-kilometre charity bike ride through the back streets of London. I'm going to take on this mega challenge.
Yeah, probably a mixture of like blind positivity and also being a bit dumb.
But then you also said the experience of finishing there, notwithstanding what the finishing line looked like, it probably then shifted your mindset into what was possible for you to achieve on the bike.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think like your body in general, because I guess you go through different phases and something like that where you think, oh, I can't do this anymore. I just want to walk and get off. Or like you think you've reached your limit and then you're fine. And then you can go a bit more and then you think you've reached your limit again and then you sort of get over that. And then you can just keep going. So because of that, then it sort of made me think, oh, okay, yeah, well, you can always keep going when you think you can't.
Wow, and I mean that to me is some mental mileage in the bank. It's like a big mental deposit that you can withdraw when you need it, and to get that very
Yeah.
early on, that's gold.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's probably benefit to not really realizing what you've actually signed up for.
And so you did that event with your father, and you mentioned earlier that both your father and your grandfather are keen cyclists themselves. Do you cycle a lot with them?
My grandpa, like we've been probably a handful of rides, nothing crazy. But dad quite a lot, yeah. Whenever I'm home we'd go out and we've done a few bike packing trips together, and he's definitely the one that got me into it. Yeah.
Wow. And when you say got you into it, more than just like the Sunday club ride got you into it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, because he was always encouraging with it, and then I guess I did like the Mallorca thing. I sort of did those things without realizing it, and then I'd never really ridden with other people as much because at the start I just rode with him a lot. So then it was nice to ride in a group and with other women and be like, oh, okay, I'm actually not as bad at this as I thought I was because Dad was really strong.
It's amazing that your self talk initially, despite doing these monumental things, was that maybe not riding with other people, and it's only until I ride with others that I see that I'm actually okay about this. So that perspective again, shifting the perspective of what was possible for you on a bike and just what your ability was like too.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Especially like when I first moved to London, it's quite intimidating. It's like you go to Regent's Park and everyone has got all the gear, all the like latest cycling fashion. And I remember when I first went to Regent's Park, I was like, I just felt so out of place. I mean, now I'm like fully decked out in the gear and probably spend way too much money on it. But I remember before being like, doesn't really feel like I'm ready to like join the cycling clubs yet because I didn't look like them.
What then sent you down this chain of targeting these harder and longer endurance events?
I'm not really sure. I think I've realized that I quite like extreme situations and challenging myself. I guess like seeing if I can actually do it. And then, so the more into cycling I got, the more I sort of started looking at those things because I tried some crit racing and road racing, but I quickly realized that I wasn't a sprinter. And then I really enjoyed it. I liked the buzz of it. But then I also thought, oh my God, it's so much commitment and there is the risk of crashing and wrecking your body for which like because I work in TV, I need to be able to hold a camera and stuff. I realise that I'm never going to win. I know it's not about the winning, but it's nice to think that you've got a chance. And then I realised, maybe there's another way of doing races. You get a bit more for your money than just like an hour crit. And then started looking into the longer stuff.
What was the longest ride? What was the first long endurance ride you sort of signed up for?
To be honest, that bike race around Wales, that was probably the first one because I'd signed up for the TCR like a couple of years ago, but then COVID happened and it was cancelled for 2 years.
I mean, what inspired you to sign up for TCR? Because, and for the benefit of our listeners, the TCR, when people talk about ultra cycling, the TCR, short for Transcontinental, is one of the first things that some cyclists will know about straight off the bat. If some people have an idea of what ultra cycling is, that's the event that potentially introduced the concept of ultra cycling to them. But what piqued your interest in that event? Because that event's, traversing the continent of Europe, it's not a small ultra event. It is one of the pinnacle events, and it's over 4,000 kilometres in length.
Yeah, I think it was probably good that I didn't realise what it actually completely was. Like I read Emily Chappell's book and was sort of blown away by her story and the fact that she was seemingly this ordinary woman, but yet she was capable of being completely extraordinary and just sort of defying all the odds, and just her story and how exciting the adventure of it sounded and being in the situations that you just never would be in sort of normal life. That was really attractive. that was the only context I really had of the race. And then aside from Googling like best cycling races.
Targeting the one at the top of the list.
Yeah. And I didn't really understand all of its legacy, I don't think, until I was already in it.
So TCR, you signed up for the biggest event there was, and then COVID happened, stops the world in its tracks, stops travel in its tracks. How did you deal with COVID initially? Because as someone who loves riding their bikes and whatnot, was that something you were able to do where you were?
Yeah, I think I was in a very fortunate position because I I stayed in London for a little bit and then I went back to my parents and they live in Hereford. And it was that period of time when the weather was like ridiculously great. It was so sunny. Um my work wasn't too busy at that time. So actually, yeah, I put in a lot of miles then and it was really nice. And I think in a way it was I there's no way I would have finished the TCR if I'd done it when it was supposed to happen. There's just no way. I was so underprepared.
No amount of panic training would have got you to the start line?
I don't even think at that point it would have been like my physical ability, but I think all the other aspects of it, like the kit, I just had I just had no idea how important all of that side of it was and the mental training. And I think I was just sort of carried away by the idea of the adventure and like the glamorized side of it. I didn't at that point I didn't really understand what it actually would take to finish it. So then having that extra time was, I think, really actually really good. Yeah, although it was annoying when it was cancelled again the year after.
Because that was 2021. What were you thinking at that point?
I was just really keen to do it because I'd bought a new bike. I thought I was ready to do it. And I think because you mentally prepare yourself, I was really like gearing myself up for it. And then the fact it then didn't happen again, you're like, oh, like keeping that momentum for another year was quite difficult, I think. And there was probably a month where I just sort of was like, oh, maybe I won't bother doing it. And yeah, like focus on something else. But also my friends were all probably sick of me talking about it by then.
Because it's not a small undertaking, and being able to prep for it takes a huge amount of time. You were talking not just physically riding those sort of distances to prepare you for what you're doing each day, but also, yes, there's the mental side, and then there's the kit, the bike, how you fit that out. There's also the route planning, which is not insignificant in itself.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, the benefit of having that extra time is that I then probably, it must have been like 10 months out from the race, I started with a coach, Jasmine Muller, and she is amazing.
She
And she was just,
is.
yeah, she was just brilliant. And she taught me so much. All the things I didn't even know I needed to know, she taught me. And I think having her support and guidance and knowing that she'd done it before and the fact that she really understood women's bodies and training specifically for ultras and how that's different. And that was really helpful. And she was great. And knowing that she had done those things before was a good reminder of like that it is doable.
And it would be possible for you as well.
Yeah.
No, I've come across Jasmine's work before as well, and have some other friends who have her as a coach as well. She has a really good saying about being the egg.
Oh yeah, be the egg. The same boiling water that softens the potato hardens the egg. It's about what you're made of, not the circumstances.
Exactly.
Yeah, love it.
No, I do too. I do too. I think it's great. And it's actually the type of, I don't know that affirmation's the right word, but it's the type of saying that it would be a really relevant and good one to have in your head when perhaps you're a few days into an ultra questioning the why.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And she sort of each week within the training plan, there'd be mindfulness or what's the word? Sort of like mental activities training as well. So things that to help you get through those really difficult moments. So like thinking about your coming up with a scenario that makes you feel good if you're feeling really shit in a race or something, and then you can visualize that thing. I'm explaining it really badly.
No, I think you're explaining it quite well. I can picture that, and again, that's sort of like it's going through like positive visualization and stuff like that. So, did you go to the start line of your events knowing that, okay, I'm going to go through some low moments, but this is the deposits in my mental back that I'm going to be able to withdraw on that?
Yeah, and I guess it makes you feel a bit more safe knowing you've got that toolbox of extra things aside from just power in your legs or your body. So when your legs fail, you know that there's like something you can fall back on and to remind you why you're doing it, and that actually it is going to hurt and it is going to feel like you can't keep doing it, but you know that, so it's fine, and it just there's something that it unlocks so you can just keep going. So I find that really helpful. Yeah, and I think what became really important was the events leading up to it, because I'd never really done any night riding, and that was the thing that I was actually quite scared of. So factoring that in, or doing training rides at night, and then putting yourself in situations where you feel really uncomfortable, you sort of have those quite difficult low moments, but then because you get through them, even if it's on a much smaller scale, it makes you stronger for the next one.
So preparing yourself for riding in the dark and riding at night, and I'm not sure whether your training involved riding through a night, how did you go about tackling that?
Well, the first time I did it with a friend. And within that, bivvying was also something I was quite nervous about. And yeah, me and my friend Pip, we decided we set off from London and maybe around sunset and thought we're just going to keep going for as long as we can until we can't go anymore. Then we're going to find a bivvy spot and we're going to sleep, and then we're going to ride back the next day. It all started off quite well until it just started pissing down with rain. I think it rained for about 3 hours solid, and we both just like keep going like, oh, this is so grim, what are we doing? And then in a way it was kind of good, a good distraction from the fact it was dark. And then it must have been about 1 a.m. we decided, well, actually I was the one that cracked first and said, let's find somewhere to sleep. And there was this big barn that we were by, so I said, like, let's try that. But it was massive and there was no sort of door or anything, so it was freezing and we were soaking wet, and we both bought these ridiculously light sleeping bags that just weren't good for like the UK slightly cold weather. And we didn't sleep, we were just sort of like huddled next to each other, just like aggressively shaking because we were so cold. And there was like a family of rats that were living in the corner next to us. So it was a pretty bleak introduction to night riding and bivvying.
The only thing that would top that situation off now is just like, and just picture it for me, stick with me, Lizzie, just a bunch of tarantulas coming out, appearing from the barn. Wow.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah. So after that, then it was like, oh, okay, we didn't die in our sleep of hypothermia. It wasn't actually too awful. And then, yeah, it was a good sort of armory for the next one.
It's almost like with the Mallorca 312, how you did the hardest thing first, so everything was fine. And so now you did the hardest thing. I couldn't think of a more miserable bivvying experience than being soaking wet and freezing cold in a big open barn with rats.
Yeah. Yeah. But the backup of another person, I think, is really comforting, because then it stops you from thinking, I'm going to get abducted, I'm going to be murdered in my sleep, which sounds completely irrational, but yeah, real fears.
Yeah, and I'd nearly go through the even further down the line and saying real fears of being a solo female traveller as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, it all feeds into it, doesn't it? And it doesn't help whenever you sort of tell your parents or like family, oh, I'm going to do that, and then they're like, oh, but by yourself? Are you sure that's a good idea?
Actually, if you're interested, and to our listeners, if you haven't heard it, if you look up our podcast episode with Dr. Florence Cattell, she told me a great strategy which she dealt with these sort of fears. And it was all about reframing your mindset and looking at things as bad luck. Bad luck can happen anywhere, and it could happen anywhere with me doing anything. So I'm not going to stop doing things because I'm worried about bad luck. And yeah, so listen to that episode. It's a really, for me, it's reframed how I'm taking my approach to these sort of things from now on, for sure.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it.
So you mentioned then, obviously, you were able to do this type of training. You also did a bit of bike packing and some longer distance trips as well prior to your first ultra as well, didn't you?
Well, the first long distance thing was the summer when TCR was supposed to first happen. Then I suggested to some of my friends who weren't actually cyclists, why don't we go on a cycling holiday in Scotland and do the North Coast 500? And they were all like, oh, yeah, sounds great. None of them actually knew what it was or what it meant. So,
There's a certain benefit to that, isn't there?
yeah, it sort of went one of two ways, really, because I think some people really enjoyed it and some people were a bit like, Lizzie, what are we doing? That was quite entertaining and also fun. It was really fun for me. It was a good, team bonding trip, but it wasn't considered a holiday by everyone. Leave it there.
Yeah. And so what sort of distance were you riding each day there?
Our longest day was probably 100 miles or like 120 we did. And then I think after the first few days, I think everyone was pretty wrecked. And then we started toning it down a bit and we had a few days off. And then it was definitely became more leisurely. But that was the first multi-day thing I think I'd actually done, which was ridiculous because I was supposed to be doing the TCR at that point.
Mind you, the terrain there in Scotland, it's not easy terrain either. I imagine it to be quite lumpy in places as well.
Yeah, it's certainly hilly. Yeah, we were really lucky with the weather though because it was lovely.
You must have done it during Scotland's like 1 week of summer.
Yeah, we were so lucky. It was really nice, and it was still sort of locked down there. That was the only downside. So there wasn't really a lot of things open. One time we did stay in a hotel because we found one that was open, but otherwise, we were camping. And a lot of the campsites actually didn't have their shower blocks and toilets open because of the thing. So it was not glamorous.
Great prep for the TCR.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
Another bit of mental resilience to put in the bank for a future withdrawal.
Yeah, and I'd love to do it again, but try and do it in a shorter time. And actually, I think that would be fun.
So Lizzie, you had this amazing bikepacking experience. TCR was delayed, but you signed up with a great coach in Yasmin and started doing this different type of training, which was great. How did you come then to signing up for just a bike race roughly the size of Wales? Sorry, what?
Yeah, that's it.
That's the name of the race?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful.
Oh, I love it though. It's great.
Yeah, it does what it says on the tin. Well, I needed, me and Jazz talked about it, and I needed some sort of like warm-up race because I'd never done a race like that before. So we were trying to find like a multi-day event that would simulate those kind of conditions and trying to ride through the night and not having much sleep and practicing, like testing all my kit setup. And that one just fitted in with dates and time frames and stuff. So then, I did that, and I really didn't know what to expect from it. And I also wasn't expecting to enjoy it. Part of me thought, I'm going to hate this, but I didn't. That was really cool to think, okay, oh great, I do actually really like this.
This doesn't have to be a miserable experience. For the benefit of our listeners, can you let us know sort of just a bit about what the race entailed?
Yeah, so it was an ultra race, self-supported, and there were, I think, 25 or 23 or 25 waypoints, and they were released maybe a week before the race started, and you had to go to each of those points and take a picture, and each one was related to some sort of like landmark. So it was like a cross on a beach or a lighthouse or something, and then you took a timestamp picture with the coordinates, and then it was quite a fun way of doing it. And then you had to put it on Instagram and tag the race in it and say what checkpoint it was or waypoint, and then between that you built your own route. So that part of it was quite fun because it felt a bit like orienteering, and it was 1,000 kilometers, and the fastest one to the end wins.
And a lot of climbing in that too, being in Wales.
I can't remember how much climbing was, but it was a lot, and I didn't really spend much time doing my route, and I think I definitely could have gone a better way that didn't involve. Sometimes I was like, I've just gone the wrong way. This is so much elevation. I could have taken the main road and missed this out.
But you actually did quite well in that event. Lizzie, and perhaps you're being a bit modest, but you took out the prize of first female finisher, didn't you?
Yeah, but there weren't many women in it.
I know.
There was 5,
I say that
6.
as a letdown for all events at this point in time, that we need to have more
Yeah,
female representation on these start lines.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
Just to say, I don't think that detracts from you being the first female to finish. I think it's something you should be proud of.
I think I was pleasantly surprised with how it went, and more just like how I felt physically, because I remember on the start line, I can't remember his name, but there was a guy stood next to me and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to try and do this in 36 hours or something." It was something ridiculous like that, and I sort of looked at him and I was like, "Whoa, that is insane." And then he just flew off at the start. And then I remember seeing him, it must have been, I don't know if it was at the end of like the first 24 hours or something, and he must have just been having a low point, and it was in the middle of the night. I think it must have been like 2 a.m. and we were near a checkpoint, and at that point I was feeling really good, and I just sort of like cruised past him and was like, "Oh, it's that guy that said he was going to do it in like 36 hours or something." And there was something about that really spurred me on, because I was like, "Oh yeah, actually I'd been going for, I must have done 400k at that point," and I was like, "Oh, I actually weirdly feel like quite good," which was a nice feeling.
No disrespect to that person that obviously wasn't having the event that they had envisioned in their head and had signed up for, but I could just imagine the huge mental boost of passing that person, because
Yeah.
this is the first ultra that you've lined up for, and you're sat next to someone like this at the start line who's telling you how quick and fast they're going to be doing it. What did that make you think of on that start line at that point?
Just like, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I think especially as a woman, because you always feel like people automatically assume you're going to be slower, or like you have to prove yourself a bit more, or yeah, and I think cycling is quite bad for that.
It is. We have a term called chicked, or being chicked, and
Yeah.
and many women who cycle will be able to recount their own stories, riding along or passing a male cyclist, and that's all well and good, but all of a sudden the person that you've passed doesn't want you to have passed them, does everything in their power to go ahead of you, to keep with you, and doesn't seem to acknowledge that perhaps you're just stronger than them. Well, you certainly chicked that man.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was quite satisfying.
Power to you, Lizzie. So achieving that ultra, a bike race roughly the size of Wales, and successfully completing it, that must have given you a real positive boost for TCR then.
Yeah, definitely. And I think particularly because there were some moments that were really tough. Like it must have been the it was the second night. So I've been going for a long time, and it must have been, I finished that day at 1 a.m. I think. So at that point, it must have been about 11 a.m. and I really needed to pee, but it was freezing. And I thought, and that night I'd actually booked somewhere to stay. And earlier on in that day, I'd messaged them and said, "Look, I'm doing a race. I'm not going to be there till about 1 a.m. Will you be there? Can you leave the key for me outside if you're not going to be there?" And they said, "Yeah, of course. We'll leave it in this box." They gave me really specific instructions about where it was. And it was in this like tiny village somewhere in North Wales. And I was like, "Oh, great." Like I was really tired, and that thought of that bed just kept me going. And even in my message to them, I was like, "Thank you so much. Like having that bed in mind, that's going to keep me going." And then, yeah, like I said, I really needed to pee, and I was a couple of hours away and just kept thinking, "I'm nearly there. I'm nearly there. I'll just wait until I get to the hotel." And then eventually, and it started raining, and then I couldn't find the hotel. And then at some point I found it, and I followed their instructions, and I went to this box, and there was no key. They'd forgotten. They weren't answering their phone or anything. I just sort of had a panic moment, and I had kind of forgot that I really needed to pee. And then suddenly it just happened. I just peed myself. And then I was outside this hotel at 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere in Wales, and I was like, and it was raining. I was like, "What am I going to do now?"
I guess at least you would have felt warm for a little bit.
Yeah, all about 1 minute.
Wow.
And then there was a few pubs in the town. I was like, I was like, I can't bivvy in this because I'm freezing and I'm wet and I'm like disgusting. But equally, I didn't want to carry on cycling because I was at that point where I was like, I really need to lie down. And then I looked at a few of these pubs and there was just a lot of drunk people, and I thought, well, I can't go into the pub. And then I was like, I cycled around a little bit, and then I thought, I'm just going to have to keep going. And then as I was heading out of this little village, there was lights on in this hotel, and I thought, oh my God, that is my saving grace, that place. And then it was locked, but there were these men, I could see them in the room watching golf or something. So I knocked on the window, probably this like crazy woman, just like, hey, can you let me in? So they let me in round the back, and it turns out they were on a golfing holiday, and thankfully they were really nice, and they must have very quickly realized like what situation I was in, because they were just so nice. And one of them let me use his shower. The other one came down and brought his bedding down and built me a bed in the reception on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. The other one went and got a banana from his room, and they were just, they were just so nice. And I was so embarrassed and humiliated, but also sort of comforted by, the kindness of strangers. And then, so I had a quick shower, asleep on the floor in this reception, and then a couple of hours later carried on.
Oh my gosh, what an experience.
Yeah. So it went from being sort of the worst moment of like, what am I going to do, to then, oh, okay, that shit can happen, but there's a way around it, and then somehow you're on the move again.
Wow. Oh my gosh, it's just an amazing, that is uplifting. Actually, good question for you. Did you have a spare set of cycling bib shorts?
I did not.
Wow.
Because it was just, I did not at that point, but I tried, because I showered, I put them in the shower with me. But that actually, for that race, that was one of the biggest mistakes I made, is I didn't use chamois cream. I used Vaseline, which was a serious error because it doesn't wash out. I'd covered the chamois in Vaseline, but when I tried to wash the shorts, it wouldn't
penetrate through. It would be like an actual barrier, an emollient sort of barrier there.
It was pretty gross.
Better to have made that mistake there on the shorter event though, and know that for the TCR. What a memory. What a memory for a race. And actually, I'm just here thinking away, you've just got so many more deposits in that mental bank that you're able to withdraw now. Yeah, wow. What an experience, Lizzie.
Yeah, it was funny afterwards. The next day I was thinking like, that was quite a wild, unexpected night.
So you've had this experience and you've now done all this training. I'm just thinking now, and I'm fast forwarding you ahead to the day of the TCR. What's going through your mind at that point?
I was a lot more nervous and stressed than I thought I'd be. And my dad and grandpa came to the start with me. I went home first and he drove me, and then we picked grandpa up on the way, and then all got the ferry over. And because grandpa is how he is, he was asking me constantly, have you packed everything? Have you got this? Have you got this? And kept like suggesting new setups of my bike. And I was just like freaking out. Yeah. And then that was sort of the point where it kind of dawned on me that I had no idea what to expect. And the next time I was going to see them or be finished with that race was once we'd crossed a continent, which was quite difficult to think about.
I don't even know, like, wrapping your head around that now. Like, I can't wrap my head around that. And yeah, I mean, I guess you mentally, there's a saying where you shouldn't think about the end of an ultra because it's too far away. So did you have that as a strategy as well, like point by point? And did you have the checkpoints on the course as something to aim for instead?
I didn't really think about it in any way. I just was trying to think about each day and like each sort of like hour, I guess, because when I thought about the finish, I couldn't, because it just freaked me out, because I know how difficult I found that 3 days, the Wales thing, and thought, oh, this is like 4 times that. So I was just trying not to think about that. But once you get going, the adrenaline and the excitement, the first few days, it was quite easy not to think about that because you're caught up and you feel fresh, and it was really exciting. But it was towards the back end of it, when you are struggling, that when I was thinking about the distance, it just sort of, it was a weight, and it was sort of felt like it was pulling you back a bit.
Yeah, that's where it's more imperative to focus on more manageable checkpoint markers in your own mind, whether it's the next town and the next ice cream you're going to have, or
Yeah, food was definitely a focus.
food would have been a motivator for me. And actually, I need to ask this question for the benefit of some very, very good cycling friends of mine. I noticed in one of your Instagram stories when you were actually heading over to the start of the event and you had all the gear on your bed, one of your green bags was actually a Percy Pig green bag, and amongst my cycling friends, Percy Pigs is seen as a real cycling power up, real lift. So I was wondering, did you travel with any Percy Pigs, and if so, what's your favourite flavour?
The original Percy. I do love them. My mum always gets me them for Christmas as well, so I definitely took them with me.
Great, I'll let them know. They're going to be chuffed to hear this. All right, because. And I know it's so cliche because you hear about it all the time, and ultra cycling races are really just an eating competition. But how did you go in that eating competition, and how did you manage your nutrition through the whole race?
I just try to eat as much as possible. I always sort of thought, oh yeah, I love eating. I can eat a lot, and that wasn't going to be a problem. But I think it wasn't until when I had a meal and afterwards I suddenly felt so good that I realised actually I hadn't been eating properly and I hadn't been eating meals. So then I tried, that's probably after maybe day 4, and I really started to try and have at least one meal a day. And then in between that, I ate a lot of pastries. I always sort of went for tried to get as much like stodgy stuff as possible. So if I went to Lidl, I would buy probably like 3 pastries, maybe one of those pizza rolls, sometimes like a loaf of that brioche bread, or as much as I thought I could carry. And then just try and constantly eat if I could.
And it's one of those things, you get to a point in these sort of events where multiple days in, whatever you're eating is actually never going to be replenishing the fuel that you're burning and what you're actually expending energy wise, is it?
Yeah, it's true. And I did take with me, I had a little pill box and I took different vitamins, like those multivitamin tablets, like salt tablets. I really went hard on those, and I think that was probably my saviour in some ways. I had a lot of those, and I think they really made a difference, like electrolytes and salts. So that was probably a help on the side. And aside from that, just a lot of ice creams when I was too hot. Coke.
You had some challenging weather from that perspective, and it's just a part of the course of when the TCR, where it sits in the calendar and in the seasons, like it's a summer event. You had some heat waves, didn't you?
Yeah, and I'm not usually very good in the heat, so I did find that quite difficult. And I started buying bags of frozen peas when I could find it, also bags of ice. But it made such a difference just having that little bit of relief and like coldness. I'd put it down my jersey either on the back or the front, and then wherever possible, also try and like put water on my head and things like that. But there was also quite a few moments where I felt dizzy and like I was going to pass out when it got really hot. And then I just had to pull over and just sort of lie down, find a bit of shade and just lie down for a bit and ride it out, and then, keep going.
It's great that you had the presence of mind to stop yourself from just pushing through that type of extreme weather when you can see the signs that your body was suffering.
Yeah.
Is that actually something that you had mentally prepared for before the event?
I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest. I think it was just more of like an instinctive thing, sensing the change between just being in pain because it's hard or feeling like physically unwell, like with maybe like dizziness and feeling sick, or like there's a difference I think between feeling like you're struggling to feeling like you're going to pass out.
I can definitely understand exactly what you're trying to describe there.
Yeah, it's like being really hungover.
I mean, with the TCR, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, you've got the challenges of the distances, you've got the challenges of what food is available to you, you're crossing borders, so you're speaking different languages, possibly different languages multiple times each day, depending on where you're traveling as well. The terrain's tricky as well. In fact, in talking about the terrain, the TCR has sections, whilst it's a free route in that you plan how you will get from Heradsbergen in Belgium to the finish line in Bulgaria, you have set parts of the route which were mandatory, and they were called the checkpoint parcours. Parcours number 4 in this edition of the race was extremely notorious. Can you please tell us about your particular experience on this?
Because I'd sort of massively underestimated the route planning and how long it would take me and actually how important it is. I just sort of ignored the parkour sections because I was like, oh, they're already planned. Like I don't need to think about those. I don't need to, like that's fine. And I didn't then take the time to actually look at what they were, like as extreme as it was in terms of the off-road bit. I think otherwise I probably would have taken maybe got stopped and got some different tires and switched them over or something just for that part, or I don't know. Basically, I hadn't thought that bit through, and I was already behind that day because I'd stopped earlier. When I just crossed the border into Romania, there was a little town, and I was worried that if I kept going, I wouldn't find anywhere to stay, and I didn't feel comfortable bivvying. So I stopped earlier that day, and then I knew that the next day to get to Parkour 4, I didn't want to do it in the dark because I'd heard stories of other riders being attacked by the wild dogs up there because there's also bears, and it just sounded, and I'd already been a bit worried about the dogs. Anyway, so I set off really early that day to get to checkpoint 4 in the parkour section, and then it must have been about 1 a.m. I set off, and then I was just constantly chased by wild dogs.
Oh my gosh,
And
that is like my biggest fear. I've had the experience of a dog chasing me. I can't imagine multiple.
it was the fact that they were so fast, and because it's like pitch black and you're in the middle of nowhere and you've got no signal, it's that thing of like, oh shit, like this dog could actually rip me off my bike right now, and that's a real possibility, and then I'm going to be eaten alive by dogs, and like what a horrible way to go. And because you're a bit delirious as well, it's you sort of imagine all the worst possibilities.
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily delirious. It's just you were in an extreme state of fatigue. You've just done multiple. What day are we up to here? 11 or 12 potentially?
Yeah, nearly 3,000 kilometers.
Exactly.
Probably about that.
And averaging 4 hours of sleep a day.
Yeah.
I think your reaction's a normal one when you're in a normal everyday life stage, yet alone at that state of heightened emotion, if that makes sense as well. How did you deal with the dogs?
I was shitting myself, to be honest.
It sounds reasonable.
Yeah, but you kind of don't really have any option because there's no way you can go. There's nowhere else you can go than just like keep going forward. So
Out sprint them.
Yeah, and like my sprint at that point was pathetic. So
I bet it wasn't. I bet it was the strongest sprint you've ever had.
Oh, I don't know. It was like barely. It felt like you're barely moving, and then so that really freaked me out because they got so close and they were really fast, and they sort of come out of nowhere because it's so dark. You don't see them until they're basically next to you, and that shook me up. So I did not want to be stuck on that mountain pass with the idea that actually up there you can't move quickly and get out their way because it's a difficult like terrain. But to get to checkpoint 4, you had to go up the highest pass in Romania, then slightly down it, and then back up it, and then there was the parkour 4 section.
It just sounds so cruel.
It was so mean. It was so mean.
I think every rider thought that.
Yeah, because by the time I then got onto it, I was much later than I wanted to be up there. I think it must have been about 5 p.m. and I just thought, it's going to get sunset's going to start soon. And within the first 2k on that parkour, it was just, I've never ridden on gravel really before, which was probably an oversight, and it was completely rocky. And within 2k I'd already had like 4 punctures or something ridiculous, and I'd gone through all my spares, and I just sort of sat there. I just sat on the thing thinking like, shit, what do I do now? Because it was a 40-kilometer section, and I knew that I couldn't walk it in the dark because I didn't want to get eaten by dogs or bears. It would take me hours to walk it, and then I just sort of decided quite quickly that I was going to have to go back. There's a little sort of ski village back up the mountain, or like down the other side slightly. So I just retreated to there and thought, once I get there, I'll think of a new plan. But I just do not want to be on this pass at night. But even getting back up there was a mission because it was actually a lot further than I'd thought, than I remembered. And when I got there, because it was the Romanian holiday, I knocked on the door of 6 different hotels. They were all full. And I just was like, I was at the point then of like I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to stop.
You were at the hating life stage of the ultra cycle.
100%, absolutely hating it. And then my dad called me. He was like, your dot's moving the other way. Where are you going? What's happened? And it was just so unhelpful because I was trying to explain to him, and he was like, yeah, well, you need some more. You need to get some more puncture stuff. I was like, yes, I know, Dad. Thank you
I'm
very
in
much.
Romania.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's a holiday.
Yeah, there's no bike shops open. The closest one's 2-hour drive away. I'm going to hang up right now and I'll call you once I've thought of a solution. So that was not helpful. And then eventually I found somewhere to stay, but I didn't have any Romanian currency and they didn't accept cards. So he got his mate who spoke English, who was drunk, to sort of sit, and we had to do some kind of IBAN transfer, and it just took hours, and they were really sort of pissed off at me because the translation barrier. And then eventually I was in that room and I just thought, this is this is really not fun anymore. And I actually managed to source a puncture repair kit. Like, there's the patches, because I'd just gone through all of mine, some new tubes, and then the next day I just set off again. I didn't want to, but at that point as well I thought, well, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Like, I have to cycle to, even if I wanted to go home now, I have to cycle somewhere. So I may as well just keep going. And what sort of made me think that I could just keep going was seeing that the other riders who I'd been riding like sort of close to, who had seen, they'd done it. One of the ladies, Kirsten, sorry, I think I messaged her, or I messaged her saying, like, how bad is that section? Um, and she sort of said, oh, like, it's not great, but it's fine. Like, you can do this. Like, you've got this. And I was like, okay, if Kirsten's done it and she says it's fine, it must be like, I'm going to have to do it.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Yeah, she was my saviour.
I'm so glad she told you that.
I know. Yeah, it was amazing.
Because it looked like hell. I'm sorry. I've seen photos of this parkour, and to call it gravel, I think, is even a nice way to call it. It was sharp, rocky cycling hell.
Yeah.
40 odd kilometres of it as well, wasn't it?
It was 40 kilometres and it took me 8 hours. And also before that, I hadn't even thought about stocking up. So I had no food and water. And I had climbed back up the mountain again to get to the start of the parkour. And there was these sort of little like huts at the top for like tourists to go and buy things from. And I thought, I'm going to have to try and go into one of these and ask for some food, because otherwise I'm going to again be eaten by the dogs and left for dead.
You sort of hit survival mode, didn't you?
Yeah, 100%. That's what it felt like.
And you got through it.
Yeah, some lady gave me some food and water, and because I just stood in her hut and cried.
That'll work.
So yeah, but yeah, the good thing is once I got through that, I thought, you know what, that was hell, but now I've done that, I can get to the finish.
And getting to the finish, was that something that you thought of during the ride to spur you on, or was that still too overwhelming and you were in disbelief at the idea that you could get there?
I definitely used the finish, or like visualizing getting to the finish, as a big motivator. Yeah, I think that was a real big one.
What was it like then? Like, you got to the finish, what was that like?
Actually, I think the bit, because I knew my parents were at the finish, I didn't want to get to the finish and just sort of like cry and be overwhelmed by it. So I sort of made myself have that moment by myself before I got there. So it was when I first saw the Black Sea, and that's when I allowed myself to have that moment. And that was really cool, because you suddenly thought, oh my God, like, this is it, like, I've done it. And I put my favorite song on and was like really happy. And then, yeah, so when I got to the finish, I was like, oh, hi, yeah, finished now, because I'd already had that moment of like, I've done it.
And you know, the thing is, that's in your history now. Nothing will ever take that moment away from you. Like, you did this. You did this monumental ride that crossed countries and a continent. Like, I think I was reading, it's 13 countries, 4,200 kilometres, 5 Everests, which is 46,000 metres of climbing. It's more than your average passionate cyclist would potentially do in a whole year. And you did this, Lizzie, in 15 days.
Yeah, it's funny because you don't really think about it like that, because there's a load of other nut jobs also doing it. So it's sort of normalised.
It is, but you're an inspirational nut job, if that's how you want to put it. Honestly, I think it's such a courageous and inspiring achievement. I absolutely am enthralled hearing you tell this story. It's just fantastic. And I hope that there's other women listening to Lizzie tell this tale who are intrigued enough to look at signing themselves up on the start line and finding out that this is possible. That's just great.
Yeah, physically, we're sort of designed for endurance.
We are women. Our bodies are designed to endure.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's awesome. Lizzie, I could speak with you for hours, but I know that really we shouldn't. I'm in my flow state. I could listen to you forever. I have 2 very quick questions now that I ask all my guests to wrap up my shows. They're both cycling related. The first is, if you have a choice of riding a climb or having to ride into a continual brutal headwind, which one are you choosing to do?
Probably the climb.
Yeah, totally. The climber in me loves these responses.
I wouldn't call myself a climber, but I quite like the feeling of it.
I think after doing 46,000 metres of climbing in just over 15 days, there has to be a climber in you somewhere. A climber and a dog sprinter. Okay, and final question. You have a day ahead of you where you're on your bike for 4 hours. Would you rather spend that time cycling with other people or cycling on your own?
I think it depends who the people were, but probably, honestly, I think it depends on like my frame of mind or like all the day. I know that's not a very good answer.
No, it's the right answer for you.
Yeah, like because sometimes I like to just put podcast on and just go. But then sometimes a group ride is also really nice.
Definitely. I guess you choose what you need at that point.
Yeah.
Whatever's going to lift you up. Well, Lizzie, spending time and hearing your story has certainly lifted me up. I'm so thankful that you said yes to allowing our podcast to share it with our listeners. Thank you so, so much. Quickly, when our listeners want to keep tracking and following and seeing what your next adventures are, whether it's in cycling or filmmaking, how can they find you on this beautiful world wide web of ours?
Well, I have Instagram and I have big plans to start a YouTube channel of just following women doing cool stuff. So like anything from, there's like a lady in Wales who holds the world record for the longest cold swim, something like that. But so if there's any women that have stories like that, let me know, because
definitely I will keep track of you and update our podcast episode notes with that YouTube channel when it comes into fruition. But in the meantime, what's the name of your Instagram handle?
It's just Liz Jenkins.
Lovely. And I will link to it in our show notes as well. Lizzie Jenkins, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so, so much.
No, thank you. It's been really fun. It's been fun to recount it all. I sort of forgot about it.
No, I think you need to write it down, and it's your own book. Emily Chappell inspired you to sign up, and I know that you are going to be inspiring others.
Thank you. That's very kind, and thank you for doing this.
If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review. It really helps the podcast to grow and reach a wider audience. Also, feel free to share it with others and post about it on your social media. Lastly, do you have your own story you'd like to share with us? Then please get in touch by sending an email to podcast@seektravelride.com and request to be featured as a guest on the show. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.